If you were stranded in the Caribbean Sea after being left behind on a scuba diving trip, what would you do? In this How to Beat video, I'm going to break down the mistakes made by our tourists, see if we can make better decisions, and ultimately attempt to beat the cold, uncaring ocean in open water. I'd like to start with a quick disclaimer. This movie was partially inspired by the real-life disappearances of Tom and Eileen Lonergan, an American couple serving in the Peace Corps who were accidentally left behind during a scuba diving trip to the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. They were never found. The movie Open Water is set in the Caribbean Sea and loosely begins the same way. However, because no one knows how the Lonergans behaved after being left behind, we're only going to speculate about the actions of the fictionalized characters in this film and share some wisdom that may help you survive if you ever find yourself adrift in the Caribbean. Being stranded in the open ocean with only your wits to keep you alive is quite honestly one of the most terrifying real-world situations you could find yourself in, right up there with being trapped in a cave-in or staring down the towering wave of a sudden tsunami. It's also, in some ways, way worse. In today's modern world, when cave-ins and tsunamis happen, local government and international organizations often band together to rescue those who have been affected. They know where the victims are and have some semblance of a protocol for how to save them and get them resources while they wait. That's not the case when someone's lost at sea. No one knows where you are, no one knows how to find you, and no one can hear you scream. It's up to us to survive being stranded, so let's see if we can. Want to beat this situation altogether? Skip the shady dive trip and download this video sponsor, Dragon City, through my link in the description. Dragon City is a free-to-play game where you can collect thousands of dragons and elements and build your own epic dragon empire. Collect food, gold, and epic gems to expand your empire and unlock new levels. Make dragon babies by breeding 2 dragons to get new ones. Hatch them, feed them, train them, and send them into merciless battle in order to make them more powerful. Dragon City also holds weekly events and a brand new battle pass to discover, where you can unlock new rewards and dragons daily. Also, you can find your favorite YouTubers and their dragons like Preston and Wisp. In December, Dragon City partnered with Unspeakable and created the Unspeakable Dragon. Click my special Nerd Dragon City link in the description. Get a special free reward to get you started. 15,000 food plus 30,000 gold plus the Scout Dragon. Daniel and Susan are just your typical overworked, overstressed couple. They're on their way to the Bahamas to escape their suburban problems with a super short beginner's reef dive. Don't worry, these 2 amateurs are card-holding certified divers. The next day, they hop aboard a local dive boat, the Reef Explorer, run by guides Davis, Linda, and Junior. Daniel and Susan stick to themselves from the start. Davis tells the group that they're heading out to a dive spot called Magic Kingdom. Someone asks if they'll see any sharks, and like any tour guide gunning for an easy paycheck, Davis reassures the group that the sharks in the area aren't aggressive towards humans. To be fair, this is true. The Caribbean islands average less than 1 shark attack per year, but as we'll find out later, all it really takes is 1. During the trip, Davis does a very rudimentary head count of 20 people, and when they reach the dive location, Davis gives everyone a quick safety tutorial demonstrating the international body language signals for "I'm okay" and "I'm in distress." Unfortunately for everyone, this bare-bones safety briefing is interrupted by a D-bag who forgot his mask back on land, meaning he won't be able to dive with everyone else. We also learn the group is going to be diving at a maximum depth of 60 feet for 35 minutes. Everyone, save the D-bag, gears up and jumps in. Davis's head count is about as simplistic as trying to keep track of people by hair color, and it's incredibly concerning since a head count isn't just some tally, it's what ensures that you don't leave anybody stranded in the middle of the ocean. Davis attempting to count off divers while they're shuffling around on both levels of a rocking boat while looking up and down, then writing a number on a blank notepad with no context is incredibly negligent. If I was the dive guide, I'd have everyone in their seats for the head count, verbally calling their names and checking them off on an official printed roster with names and faces, which I would be communicating with the other guides and the skipper. If I was the diver and saw this haphazard head count, I would be pretty concerned. Would I still go diving? Sure, but I'd make sure I was tallied up, that I made enough friendly small talk with the other tourists to avoid being forgotten, and that I never lost contact with the dive guides. As for Davis's so-called safety briefing, since a shark attack is possible, I'd also give the tourists some warning or protocol regarding what to do if they encounter a shark, so they don't flail around like wounded prey. If they get mashed up in a set of jaws, the business is gonna get some bad publicity, reviews, and, well, one less returning customer. The safety briefing is important enough that it should have been restarted after the D-bag interrupted it. Better yet, this briefing should have been given back on land before they left. A few moments later, a man and a woman resurface. The woman tells guide Linda that she can't equalize her ears and that they're going to have to give up on the dive. When they reboard the boat, Junior marks 3 people down on the head count. However, the D-bag uses this opportunity to take the woman's mask to do his own diving. Linda warns him that she can't let him go without a buddy, so he coerces the ear woman's boyfriend to go back in with him. And just like that, the boat's super accurate head count goes right out the window. By the time the rest of the group is returning from the dive, the number gets even more confused and no one notices that 2 people are missing. The deck's so scattered with discarded equipment that Susan and Daniel's stuff gets shoved into a back corner. Unfortunately, none of our expert guides thinks to do one final head count before they leave the area. There are a few things that could have happened differently here. Not only should Linda have known to note that the D-bag and the other guy returned to the water, but the team could have avoided this by simply printing out a list of guest names for the trip and having everyone sign back in when they reboarded the boat. Or, literally just doing a roll call once everyone is back on board. This is why you should always leave a note with someone you know before doing dangerous activities. Daniel and Susan should have called a trusted friend the morning of the tour with the promise to call immediately after disembarking once they were back. That way, the friend could alert authorities much earlier if they didn't hear from them. The bigger red flag is the missing equipment. Davis, Linda, and Junior should notice that the 2 massive oxygen tanks are missing. The tanks aren't slipping and sliding across the boat deck. Each tank has its designated cubby, and there are 2 gaping holes where they should be stored. Considering that your average dive suit and tank can cost between $1,000 and $2,000, a small operation like this should probably notice the loss. If not while at the reef, definitely once they get back to land. Daniel and Susan resurface a little later and realize that they've been left behind with nothing more than their dive equipment. Instead of screaming, they choose to wave the distress signal at 2 nearby boats. Susan suggests that they should swim to one of them, but Daniel worries that it'll cause even more of a headache if they board the wrong boat. Susan notices that the coral formation Daniel used to keep them close to the dive site is no longer beneath them, and Daniel realizes that they're drifting with the current. They try to signal the only boat close enough to spot them now, but it doesn't stop. These 2 are in the cracking jokes phase of their predicament and haven't quite realized that they're in for a world of pain yet. Dive tours usually dive in groups. It's easier for the company and safer for the divers if everyone is trying to stay within sight of each other. Even if Daniel wanted to look at a fish, Susan and Daniel should have noticed the other divers leaving the water and returned to the boat as directed. As certified divers, it's also likely that one or both of them would have a dive watch, making it easy to keep track of their 35-minute dive. Prior to the dive, Davis mentioned that they were diving at the Magic Kingdom site, a relatively shallow area off the coast of Walker Cay, one of the northernmost islands of the Bahamas. The reef there is located on average 1 to 2 miles offshore. Technically speaking, Daniel and Susan should be able to see the island from where they are. On a clear, relatively still ocean day like today, a person with their head above the water should be able to see about 3 miles in all directions. They could locate land on the horizon and head for it. However, the Bahamas are one of the flattest archipelagos on Earth, and the elevation of Walker Cay is only 10 feet, which might impede their ability to tell land from rolling sea. Now, with their boat missing, they should be speed swimming to the nearest boat. Even if Daniel's worried about so-called complications when boarding the wrong boat, boats have radios and could at least make contact with their tour company, or the Coast Guard if their boat wasn't reachable. You should be a grade A nuisance if it means you don't get stranded in the ocean. Surface marker buoys should have been included in their gear. Inflating them right now would provide highly visible 1.5 to 2 meter long red sausages sticking up out of the ocean that both the nearby boats might be able to see. Since they didn't bring buoys, at the very least, they should take off one of their flippers and wave it above their heads to give the passing boats a fighting chance to spot them, or remove their dive tank and catch the sun's reflection on the metal, creating their own miniature lighthouse effect. Better yet, bring a safety whistle with you while diving. It's a small, lightweight tool that can help draw attention in a crisis, and if it can save Rose from the Titanic, it can save you. The absolute best thing that they should do is activate their personal location beacon. The COSPAS StarSat satellite network can detect the location of the PLB with an accuracy of 2 to 5 kilometers. Newer PLBs have a GPS navigation receiver which drops the search area to within 100 meters. Problem is, these were only approved for sale by the FAA in, no joke, mid-2003, the same year this movie came out and 5 years after the Lonergan incident. The bigger problem here is the surface current that's taking them away from the dive site. site. Whether they can feel it or not, the wind is influencing the Gulf Stream current to take them away from the Bahamas archipelago towards the 105 miles of open ocean between the Bahamas and Florida. Not to Florida, but into the current beside it. The current that travels up the east coast and on towards Greenland and eventually around to Europe. That current flows at about 5.6 miles per hour, only slightly slower than Michael Phelps's top speed, so I'm guessing most of us aren't swimming against that. Because they're still close to the dive site and we're able to easily swim around the dive site without drifting, they should swim back to check for a permanent surface buoy. Companies that return to the same area again and again with tours might use a permanent surface buoy to help guide or anchor them to the area. Daniel and Susan could hold on to it or use their weight belts to tether themselves to it. This would allow them to remain where the dive boats are likely to return tomorrow, or where rescue is likely to look for them first. Even if no buoy is there, they might be able to survey the coral reef for high points of where they could stand or sit, or where they could tether themselves to keep from drifting. Tour companies that offer diving usually offer snorkeling as well, for anyone who isn't comfortable going below, or who has equalization problems like Ear Lady, so it's possible that there are reef structures near or at the surface. As counterintuitive as it may seem, now that there are no boats left and they don't know where the dive site is anymore, Susan and Daniel are doing one thing right. They're conserving their energy by floating rather than trying to swim. During calm seas, floating or gently swimming on your back is ideal. It's only when the sea gets bumpy that experts suggest rolling over onto your stomach to help you stay afloat. 2 hours post-abandonment, Susan's starting to get cold and they see their first shark fin break the surface mere feet from them. Susan asks Daniel to dive deep into his Shark Week obsession and figure out if they're supposed to swim or stay still. He tells her that they need to stay relatively still because sharks are attracted to wounded thrashing fish. After 4 hours adrift, the couple starts to feel the effects of hunger when they swim into a swarm of moon jellyfish and get stung repeatedly. It's only now that they begin to panic. Susan and Daniel are starting to run into the major problems any of us would have being stranded in the ocean: body temperature regulation and predator proximity. Your body loses heat 6 times faster in water, and hypothermia is possible even in tropical waters, and even while wearing wetsuits. Any temperature that causes us to lose heat can contribute to our risk of hypothermia. And since our bodies are always trying to regulate around the temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit for the people who have been to the moon, or 37 degrees Celsius for those who have not, even the balmy waters off the Bahamas, which have an average temp of 74 to 86 degrees in moonwalker degrees, or 23 to 30 degrees for everyone else, can start to feel chilly after long exposure. To compensate, their metabolisms are going haywire trying to generate heat, making them hungrier and more tired. If you find yourself struggling alone in the water, you should assume the HELP, or heat escape lessening posture, by tucking into a fetal position with your arms close to your core and your legs tucked into your chest. If you're with someone, assume a huddle position to keep warm. As for the predators, well, it's their ocean. We're just swimming in it. Daniel and Susan's wetsuits are protecting most of their bodies from passive harmful species like the moon jellyfish, which is why only their uncovered necks and ankles get stung. Jellyfish are relatively easy to avoid. The divers just have to use their goggles to move out of the swarm and then avoid scratching the affected areas, which can worsen the pain. Avoiding the sharks is going to be about as difficult as trying to stay away from Freddy Krueger in an unwakeable nightmare. The Caribbean reef sharks seen in this movie usually avoid divers, although there have been rare attacks by these sharks in the past. The real threat in this part of the Atlantic Ocean are the tiger and bull sharks, both of which have been known to attack humans without provocation. They round out the top 3 aggressive species with the great white. Oh yeah, the Caribbean has great whites too. Throw a few hammerhead sharks in there for good measure, and you've got yourself a Sharknado just waiting to happen once global warming sends a Category 10 monster storm our way. Fortunately for us, there have been only 1,400 recorded shark attacks in the US in the last 180 years or so. Unfortunately for our chances of surviving in the Caribbean without a raft, the waters between the Bahamas and Florida have the highest shark attack numbers per square mile in the entire world. Daniel and Susan see a boat and try waving it down with no success. They take off their goggles and try to use them to reflect the sunlight and draw attention to themselves, but the sky's too cloudy and the boat's too far away. Finally, they try to reflect light to draw attention to themselves. If only they thought of this earlier when the boats were actually close enough to potentially see them. This boat is just too far away. A few yards of distance can make finding someone in the ocean as difficult as trying to spot a marble in a football field. Without a modern PLB to hone in on, manually searching is near impossible. Even as recently as 7 years ago, a piece of the missing Malaysian Air Flight 370 was recovered thousands of miles from experts' best guesstimate of where it went down. Susan starts feeling nauseous because she's accidentally drinking gulps of seawater and abandons her dive suit's weights to make floating easier. Daniel then suggests that they put their gloves on and holds on to her so she can get some rest, but when she wakes, she discovers he's drifted 100 feet away from her while sleeping. I know these two are in shock, but there are a few things to correct here. Seawater is not drinkable, and I hope you all know that by now. The salt's concentration in the water is much higher than our bodies can handle, so even small sips taken over time will dehydrate you faster than it can rehydrate you, which will lead to those cramps Daniel's whining about. Drifting away from each other in their sleep is also potentially catastrophic. When Susan abandoned her dive weights, she should have used the weight belt to tether them together. Then we find out they have gloves that they're only now putting on. I don't know about you, but when I start to complain about being cold and I have gloves, I usually put them on. Not only would this have helped with the jellyfish, but it also helps to reduce heat loss. When they come back together, sharks now have them surrounded. Susan feels a pain in her leg and Daniel examines her. He discovers that something has test bitten her. Guessing by the bite size, it must have been a barracuda, yet another predatory fish found in these waters. The bite wasn't strong enough to break skin, but it managed to tear her wetsuit. Before Daniel can surface, Susan vomits, spewing partially digested food into the water around them. Daniel starts to experience cramps, and sharks start to circle closer. At this point, both should recognize that the cautious exploratory encounters that they've had with the shark so far have transitioned to something far more dangerous. Not least of all because Susan's just chummed the water with her own vomit. Daniel brought a diving knife with him. I'd have that knife poised in my hand, my goggles on, watching the water underneath me, ready to strike at the next shark that came in for a nibble. It's best to stay calm and still during non-threatening encounters in which the sharks bump or graze you, but if they seem aggressive or like they're charging you, screaming underwater and swinging at the shark can intimidate them. If a shark attacks, Daniel should aim to stab or punch the gills or underside of the shark, but avoid stabbing its top as it's very well armored with dermal tentacles. If you happen to be stranded with another person and have dive gear with you, you could also press your backs together and use your gear as potential shields in the event of attack. Daniel and Susan begin bickering, rehashing all of their relationship disasters to the benefit of exactly no one. While this is a natural response to trauma and fear, they should be focused on the very real sharp-toothed threat under their feet and working together to stay alive. Eventually, a giant cargo freighter passes by, and again, they try to signal. With a boat that big, they should have been able to see it coming from a long distance. They could have gauged where it might be when it passed them and tried to swim within a few hundred yards of where it would be, then use the flash on their camera to try to get the crew's attention. From this distance, they're just too small to be spotted by those in the wheelhouse. Spotting the freighter suggests that they've drifted into a potential shipping lane, a place where they're more likely to be spotted by passing traffic. They're a little too far north to come into contact with the Florida Strait shipping traffic, but the freighter is a good sign that more boats are likely nearby. Daniel and Susan spot an ocean buoy and start to swim for it, getting distracted midway by candies she finds in her pocket. Before they start swimming for the buoy again, Daniel is startled by a shark and drops his knife, a tragic loss as the shark attacks him almost immediately after. The water around them fills with blood. Susan manages to tourniquet his leg with a belt, but blood loss and shock make for bad bedfellows in the open ocean. The buoy was likely their only hope. They should have been sprinting for it with every ounce of energy they could muster. Getting distracted by candies in her pocket was a pathetic display of survival instincts. David fumbling his knife was the best advertisement for a wrist strap I've ever seen. With Daniel wounded and in shock, the death bells have started to toll. Experiments have debunked the myth that sharks are attracted to human blood or attack humans on purpose. They actually strongly prefer fish blood, but even a test bite can cripple or kill our pathetic, weak little bodies. Unfortunately for Daniel, the belt Susan uses is too wide to be used as a makeshift tourniquet. To properly stop the flow of blood, Susan would need to be able to tighten the belt to the point of cutting off circulation. If David had held onto his knife, they could have thinned down the weight belt and used the knife as a windlass to create a twist point, which might work. Regardless, Susan should be doing anything she can to get them both to that buoy. While it's difficult to tell from this distance, it looks like a spar-type buoy. If we were closer, we might be able to tell from the color whether it signals the right or left side of a shipping channel, or if it's an isolated danger buoy. The good news is that all three types suggest this is an area that frequently sees boat traffic. Additionally, even though we only see brief glimpses, it appears to have a platform above the waterline that they could try to climb onto. This would allow them to better regulate their body temperature, focus on fishing for food with any shiny objects they might have, or Susan's vomit, capture and drink the blood of sea turtles, and make it easier for passing ships to spot them. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather rather die of dehydration above water than be gnawed to death by some monster from the deep that I can't even see. At the very least, the buoy seems to have a series of metal bars that could shield them from additional shark attacks. Instead, they forget about the buoy entirely, effectively destroying their last chance at rescue. After dark, things get even worse when a storm fills the night sky with lightning, and Daniel's attacked by another shark. We cut to land where Davis, the dive operator, finally realizes that 2 of his people from the cruise the day before are unaccounted for. As unlikely as it seems, this is actually what happened with the real couple this movie is based on. They weren't discovered missing until 2 days after they were left behind, so if you don't think it can happen to you, think again. By morning, Daniel has succumbed to his injuries, leaving Susan alone. A rescue effort is mounted, but it's too little too late. The movie ends with Susan ultimately abandoning all hope of rescue, removing her dive gear, and disappearing underwater. This is a bleak end for both divers, and feels unfinished because until he's eaten by sharks, it's possible that Daniel could still be alive. One thing to keep in mind here is that it can be very difficult to find a pulse even with bare hands, but especially with the gloves Susan is wearing, and both blood loss and hypothermia contributing to a very faint pulse. Even in the aftermath of his death, Susan should have tried to hold on to his body or equipment to use as a deterrent from future shark attacks. She could have propped her legs up on his BCD and laid back on her own BCD to keep most of her body out of the water. She also could have used both her goggles to collect rainwater to stave off dehydration. It's been less than 24 hours since they became stranded, and in a situation like that, your own mind can become your worst enemy. There is still hope of rescue if you can keep your wits about you, stay out of your own head, and focus on what you can do to survive in the moment. Daniel and Susan made several critical errors in the course of their dive cruise that led to their untimely deaths. When their guides were showing disorganization, lack of communication, haphazard accounting of personnel and gear, they should have been extra cautious about drifting too far from the group during the dive. Simply staying in visual contact would have prevented them being left behind. A PLB could have given SAR teams an immediate SOS signal and a relatively tight search area. If only they were approved for sale months prior to the trip. It's tough to tell the timing, but immediately swimming for one of the boats when they first surfaced could have saved them. Once they became little bits of flotsam adrift in the open sea, there really wasn't much either could do, save for keeping the sharks at bay, conserving energy, and ultimately swimming for the safety of the buoy when they first saw it. For anyone stranded at sea, the takeaway here is to get out of the water as soon as possible. The ocean belongs to Cthulhu. Because the probability of being found is so minuscule, I'd say the cold and brutal ocean of open water remains unbeaten. Thanks for watching, and remember, if you find yourself adrift above the murky void of the terrifyingly deep sea, pray to the sea gods for a merciful and painless death, or a quick and easy rescue. It's up to you. All the suffering caused by a low-budget dive trip could have been avoided by downloading Dragon City instead. David and Susan are gone, but you can still save yourself by clicking the link in the description